Hi, I'm your host, Reena Suri, and welcome to Thriving Changes, a place where we share stories from brave and courageous people who have navigated challenges, crisis, or a change in their personal or professional life and gave it a new meaning. It's a platform where leaders open up about their fears, vulnerabilities, and the journey that led them to triumph. Our hope is to inspire and motivate others to take their first step towards thriving changes. Today's conversation is for budding entrepreneurs who desire to transition from the safety net of a stable job to running their own businesses. Josh Hatter is the CEO of Curated Vacation Properties that manages all rental property needs. In 2005, Josh shifted into real estate using the Federal Reserve's easy money policies. He has since excelled in short term rentals, turning his original 30,000 401k loan into more than $10 million. His company, Curated Vacation Properties, made the Inc. 5,000 in 2023 as well as in 2024. The award celebrates Josh's expertise, vision, and goal to serve others and shows his dedication to excellence. Josh has done a previous episode with us where he talks about his difficult childhood. You can find the link to that powerful episode in the description. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. Hi, Josh. Welcome back. I am so excited to have you back. In our last episode, we talked about your childhood, the difficult circumstances that you grew in. I think the takeaway was how we can improve our circumstances or our situations by shifting our mindsets and just having a proactive life. I'm really thankful that you shared the steps that you took, especially the influence of safe and nurturing relationships that you developed along the way that just supported that journey and the power that they have, how important they are in our lives, the decision to take care of your mental health. All those things have played a role in, I think, in creating a very solid foundation for you to achieve what you are achieving now in your career. So, this podcast, I like to focus on how you began your career, that journey to the multi-million dollar business that you have now, what that journey has been like.
Sure.
When you were in high school, how did you think about in that space when you have a difficult background? There are times when we don't have clarity of what we want to do next or what direction we want. Did you have that clarity in you, or was it a journey to just get your head around it?
No, it was a long journey to get my head around it. Yeah, I mean, to your point, when you're in a difficult situation, sometimes it's just about surviving, right? There was a long period where it was just, how do I get out of this environment? I did always make good grades and I played a lot of sports and stuff in high school because to me, that was my ticket out to try to get a scholarship because I knew otherwise I wasn't going to be able to go to college. For me, it was just how do I exit this environment? And then once I did, honestly, it was still a long recovery process. I had to just have some time pass. When you spend every day surviving, you effectively have two different lives. You have the one that's in the environment that you're in, as abusive as it might be, and then you have this face that you project to the rest of the world. And when you don't have to do that anymore, you don't have to compartmentalize everything in life. It's a process to undo that way of thinking. I think I thought for the vast majority of my 20s in corporate America that I could have my personal life be one thing over here and then my professional life was another thing. And those two things were different. I was probably a different person outside of work than I was at work. And I think at some point, if you're doing it right, at least in my opinion, in my situation, the reality is you're the same person wherever you are. You might be hiding the real you in a certain situation that you're in, but you're still the same person. So if you're trying to delineate and try to draw some type of line between who you are in one area of life versus who you are in the next, you're probably not being true to yourself and others. And I think the older I got, the more I realized how easy it was probably for people to see that and kind of notice that as well too. Now, especially having not only grown up in that environment, but gone through that process of really trying to figure out what are my core values and what's important to me, and then really living my life that way. It's pretty easy to be able to see it in somebody now when they're not being true to themselves or they have something going on, and being able to see trauma and things like that. So it definitely was a very long journey. I think I'm probably still on it today. I certainly have a lot more clarity now than I did 10, 20 years ago. But I think when you go through some of those types of traumas, it's a lifelong experience and journey to be able to get to some sense of normalcy. And at this point, I've embraced that I'll never have certain things that are normal in terms of like, I have a lot of close friends that talk about how their relationship with their dad is and how that's like their model of the man that they're supposed to be. And that's just not something that I'll ever have from my birth father, who passed away 13 years ago, but who was incredibly abusive before that. But at least I fortunately have somebody in my life that is like a dad now. I think you embrace that there are certain things you're never going to have or have access to. But I think if you do it right, you can come up with replacements that are just as good, if not better, than what you otherwise would have had.
I agree that there are times when we can never have certain things that other people have, but we can always create those in our future life. We can be those people to our children. And if we don't take care of our own patterns, the way we think, sometimes we are just working on autopilot, and it doesn't happen now with me, but there are times when I was becoming that person that I didn't want to become. And it was my son who brought that to my attention, that mom, you are being your mom.
Who better to tell us than the person that's going through it? So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's a lifelong journey. I mean,
Yeah,
you're literally changing the neural pathways for how you think about
exactly.
things, right? And that doesn't happen overnight. It's a long process.
Yeah. I was like, and I thought I'm being a role model and I'm doing my best. And it was literally in my blind spot. I didn't recognize it. And when he brought it, we actually had a joint therapy session. Oh my God, I had to wrap my head around it. Where is he getting that? And I was trying to do this so perfectly that I never become that person. But in some ways, it was totally in my blind spot. We did work through it, and we are in such a better place now. So if we can create those and not be that person. Now I've let go of that. I might not have that in my life, but I can do my best to give that to the people in my life. But going back to one of your points, you brought that up, being two people at work. And one of the myths that I want to address through this platform is that misconception. It's that myth that you can be two different people in your personal life and in your professional life. It never worked and it doesn't work. And I don't think it will ever work, because on the outside, we can portray that, have a very cool and composed exterior when we are in a professional life. But somewhere, I think that inner emotion shows up in our work as well, whether it
Totally.
is through slack in your work or anxiety, or we are responding. And that can be impulsive. We may not think through those. And somehow people are intelligent. We think that we are doing a great job of covering it, but I think people can make out that we are putting up a
Yeah.
face.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
And
totally.
I think we are the ones who are
Yeah,
being in denial.
I think the reality, it's hard to look in the mirror too, right? Your child holds up a mirror and says, no, this is the person that you're being, but you don't necessarily see it yourself. If you've gone through certain things and you're trying to be that better person to the people around you that you care about, And sometimes it just manifests itself in different ways, right?
Yes.
It may not be the same way. It might not be the same type of trauma or abuse that you had to go through. But if you don't deal with it and you don't try to change those neural pathways for how you deal with certain things, it's still going to reveal itself some way or another.
Somewhere. Exactly. And
Yeah,
not in the same way. I like that. It doesn't have to be in the same way, but
right.
it'll show up in some different way. So you went to your 4-year degree college through scholarship.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, actually started on an ROTC scholarship, and I went to a military school in South Carolina, and it was awful. I effectively went from one abusive environment to another. And so, there was no real separation from the trauma. I actually went, I think it was my sophomore year, maybe either freshman or sophomore year, to like basically the school psychologist. And I never had insurance until my first professional job when I was 20. And most colleges will at least make you pay for some type of like college insurance. So it's, basically like catastrophic insurance. And so I had access to 3 therapy sessions. And so I did my 3 sessions, and she recommended me to outside therapy. I was broke growing up, and I was certainly a broke teenager when I left my house to go to college, and it just wasn't an option for me. I also think the kind of the stigma and just the entire way that society approaches mental health is different now than it was in 1999 or 2000. It's very different. I worked in the defense industry for 20 years, and it used to be that when you were going for a security clearance, if you had seen a therapist, then they viewed that as some kind of instability, or is there something else here that makes this person not trustworthy? And it's a completely different attitude now, 20 years later. Instead, it's people that support the military have inherently gone through some kind of trauma, probably if you've been doing it for 20 years. And so it's more viewed as just like part of the whole person. Obviously, they want you to list that you have been through those sessions, but it's viewed completely differently now in 2023 than it was in 1999 or 2000. That was the very first time I had done any type of talk therapy, and I would have loved to continue back then, but unfortunately, it
Yeah.
just wasn't an option that was affordable to me at the time. So I really went off the deep end. I overloaded all of my classes because I hated that environment so much. And then I tested out of a bunch of classes. So I actually skipped my junior year of college. And so I left as a sophomore and came back as a senior. And I still couldn't make it through even in 3 years because I was just so fed up with the situation because it was that abusive. So I totally distracted myself with stupid stuff and wound up actually getting arrested when I was 20. And so I wound up leaving college before I could be expelled, type of thing. And I transferred to another local school, and then I deferred my acceptance for a year, let everything play itself out through the judicial process. And that was when I started in the defense industry. So it was quite a windy journey, even to get my bachelor's degree. So I wound up taking a year off. Ironically, because I had skipped a year, I actually finished it was 2.5 years that I was there. So I wound up going for 3 semesters somewhere else and finishing my undergrad degree. So I still actually graduated in 4 years. I just didn't take the most direct path through college. And then I wound up getting my master's degree about 6 years after that. I started in 2008. So finished in 2010. So yeah, definitely going from one abusive environment to another one did not help. I spent my whole life trying to survive, so that part wasn't hard. But in terms of actually like recognizing the trauma and trying to work through some of it, rather than that, instead I just threw myself into another environment that created trauma for me. And instead of trying to resolve some of the feelings from my first 18 years of life, it just gave me more to work through for the next couple of years. So it wasn't really until probably 24, 25 that I started doing talk therapy again. And I've probably spent almost 20 years in and out of talk therapy now. And I think I can have a good self awareness of, oh, I need to go work through this type of thing. But I think there's huge value in it. And it is also viewed entirely differently now than it was 20 years ago. So that helps as well, too.
Yeah, it does make sense because back then we didn't have any understanding. People didn't have any understanding of that. Now, of course, there are whole studies how much PTSD is prevalent in military life. In fact, it started from there. And then now we see it in our everyday lives as well. But it was first, I think, identified in people who come back from war.
Totally.
And so tell me, how did you get your first job?
At that point, I had a pending court case, right? So I'm 20 years old. And I really couldn't cope with the fact that I was like getting ready to graduate and I wasn't even 21. Like I couldn't even legally drink yet. And I was about to enter the real world. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I wasn't equipped mentally to be able to even cope with adulthood because I was just still messed up and just jumbled mentally from all the trauma that I'd been through as a kid. And so I actually was like working in Barnes and Noble in one of the local shops. It's always interesting to go in there because that same branch is still open all these years later. And I like to actually tell the people that are working there that I used to work there 20 years ago. So I was working there, and then I basically was like calling temp agencies to try to find work that paid more. I was making $6.75 an hour and working a minimum wage job and working there full time. And so I started doing like some of the tests and things that temp agencies will make you do. There was one temp agency. It's ironic looking back on it because the only reason I even got a job was because I hounded the temp agency. And so I had taken typing classes, like just normal office management type of stuff. And I called back and the person was like, oh, just feel free to check back. We don't have anything for you yet. And then I called back again and I didn't get any answer. And so I called the main line like a week later after that. And they were like, oh, yeah, that person's no longer with the company anymore. They got fired. Let me see if I can check on it for you. So then they called around. So that was the third time that I called. And then they called me back and they're like, oh, we had this job if you want to check it out. If I didn't make 3 phone calls to the temp agency, I probably never would have gotten that job, which wound up being a 20-year career. So I went from making $6.75 an hour to $10 an hour. Ooh. And I was a temp worker and I worked 40 hours a week there, but that was my first office job. The requirement with the temp agency was to work a 12-week contract. So after that 12 weeks, I got offered full-time employment at $12 an hour. And the upside there was that was the first time I had insurance. So by then I was 21-ish, 21 and change. And I was the first time that I could actually go back to therapy with having some help from an employer paying insurance. So that was really a bit of a winding journey just to be able to find full-time employment that had benefits. It was the first time that I had insurance and access to a 401k and like all the basic things that employees look for from their employers these days. And so I kind of jumped into my work at that point. I really could not stand what I was doing. I was doing logistics support primarily for the Navy back then in my early 20s. We talked about it a little bit last time. My now dad, he had sent out an email way back then, 2003, asking for help on a proposal. And so I volunteered nights and weekends. That was long before Zoom existed or Riverside to record podcasts. So yeah, went into the office every Saturday and every Sunday, 8 hours a day. And we worked 2 nights a week on this proposal and it took about 18 months. So I got to know him and the guy that was working for him full time very well. And I was the only person that volunteered out of the entire office of like 100 people. It was an easy way for me to stand out, but also learn something that I found more interesting in terms of like competitive analysis. And I like to win. Who doesn't if you're competitive? And so that was my kind of first exposure to doing business development. And that wound up actually resulting in a $150 million contract. That was the first contract that I was a part of helping to win. And it was the office's largest contract win to date at the time. That company actually wound up being acquired several years later. But yeah, I didn't get anything from that company. I was a multi-billion-dollar company. It didn't mean anything that I had helped out on that proposal as far as they were concerned. They gave me a $500 bonus check, and that was before taxes. So it was like $300. And they gave me 1 day off for all of the nights and weekends that I worked. But I wound up developing a relationship with this guy that still exists today. Being able to see that opportunity for what it was, even though there wasn't any real financial benefit at the time from that employer, in hindsight, that's probably one of the best professional decisions I've made in my entire career.
I have so many takeaways from that story. One was, I think, in the beginning when you said that you called 3 times. So that persistence of not accepting a no. And I've heard it somewhere that no may never mean no. It may be a no right now, but not in the future. that persistence and calling back again and again has paid off so well for you.
Right.
And as I was listening, was hard work, all those things matter, but I think we cannot take away the value of hard work and going that extra mile, especially in the beginning of your career. Because it may seem very fruitless and, oh, why am I doing this? And I'm the only one doing this. But somewhere it brings in so many skills in us that I wouldn't consider it a sacrifice or a lost deal, because I'm sure you might have picked up a number of skills that have helped you in the long run.
Oh, yeah. That led to my next job after that, which was doing business development full time in 2005. And the relationship that I built with Mark, that led to the next job after that when he hired me to work directly for him. And from there, I got offered $38,000 a year, and I was there for 15 months. And then Mark offered me $56,000 a year. Like I wound up moving. My goal is to make $100,000 by the time I was 30, and I hit it at probably like 28 or 29. And not that $100,000 means a whole lot in 2023. Inflation's taken its toll over the last little bit here,
Yes.
especially. But that was like an artificially important goal that I set for myself. And so once I found the right people, I moved up both the wage ladder and the responsibility ladder pretty quickly in corporate America. The whole time I did not like any of it, just the bureaucracy and the politics. And there's just so much of corporate America that I think is a waste of time, especially for the bigger companies that you work for. There's more emphasis on risk mitigation and litigation avoidance. How can we guard our downside, and how can we make sure that we don't end up in court? And so it doesn't really allow you to be creative to solve problems. Even if that creativity is completely legal and ethical, more often than not, they want you to stay in this tiny little box. So it did help me with my corporate career. That isn't where I truly found satisfaction, but at least it did a couple of things for me. It gave me a healthy salary so I could at least build some stability in my life financially. It also gave me insurance to continue this therapeutic process that I had started when I was 18 and couldn't afford. And then time, right? So just the lapse of time between going from one traumatic environment as a kid to then going to a military school as a teenager and then exiting that and being able to not only be in therapy and grow professionally, but also work through some of that trauma over the course of the next 10 or 15 years. So it definitely, I think in hindsight, was really necessary. It's interesting now, obviously, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of fellow CEOs, and it's very obvious the people that have spent any time in corporate America and the ones that haven't. There are some folks that find a lot of success very young, but the reality, if you look at somebody now that's 30, the last 10 years have been pretty good economically, right? If you go back to 2008, when really the financial markets almost collapsed in late 2008, housing was awful. I know a lot of folks in real estate that have made a ton of money over the last 10 or 12 years, but they haven't really been through a difficult time. I think we may be getting ready to go through in the next 2 years. And so it'll be interesting to see how they cope with some of the not so positive things that you face when the macro environment gets to be pretty negative and the sentiment gets to be pretty negative. But I guess all that to say that I think I value my experience in corporate America now that I'm a couple of years removed from it much more than I did when I was in it.
Yeah, and going back, I think one thing that stood out when you said that $100,000 doesn't mean a lot, but I guess one has to see from where you started also.
Right.
At least from nothing to something. And I think that was substantial in those days. It may not look very substantial today, but back then, to it made you independent. You could be on your own, create your own safe environment, get the help that you needed. And so it set you on the path. And I think the biggest takeaway, as you said, was the beautiful relationship that you developed with the person who's now your dad. Did he have family of his own?
No. So he was one of many siblings, but he never had children of his own. He couldn't have children of his own. And so he's been married to his wife now. His last wife actually died of breast cancer when he was in his late 20s, early 30s. And so his current wife, they've been married 25 years. But yeah, so they could never have kids anyway. So it was a different, maybe an unconventional circumstance, but between somebody coming from the background that I did and then a guy that worked at corporate America like 19 years and 6 months or something like that. And everybody knew this guy locally, and I never heard anyone say a bad thing about him. He was very deliberate about the things that he talked about. So he didn't just speak negatively about people. And I was super close to him and still didn't hear that. He was just a role model for lots of people. The last probably 3 years of my career is when I really realized how many people he had mentored over the years. And so it's interesting that it's a different approach that he took to his professional career. Now I think he is definitely much more of a dad to me. If I do something stupid or screw up, he tells me. We're past the professional point. If I do something stupid, he's going to tell me. If he's worried about my health or that I'm working too much or any of those things, he's going to tell me. He tells me that he's proud of me. The normal types of things that you would say to your child and conversations you would have with your parents. I watched him mentor people professionally for almost 20 years before our relationship really blossomed into what it is today. So,
Wow, what a beautiful building of such a beautiful relationship. And I think both of you must have, I guess, he filled that void in you that you were missing in your life, and you filled the void in him that he was missing, probably at some level. I'm sure he's mentored many people, but the way you would have responded to him would have been different. As the rapport builds, it becomes into something else. So I
totally.
guess that investment has to be there from both sides. It just doesn't
Right.
happen on its own. I'm sure you have also done your bit, whether it is following his advice or seeking his advice or being there for him in times of need.
And for me, it's not like I had a lot of trust in the system or like in people that kind of authority figures or people that you traditionally would have trust for. And so it probably even took longer for me than it normally would for somebody. But yeah, just over time, that guy has always been there for me in any way that I've needed and ways that I don't even think I knew I needed at the time. So yeah, it's definitely one of the things I cherish most in my life.
You are really blessed. So, coming back to your professional life, how did that transition happen from corporate America to being an entrepreneur?
So I started back in 2012. Actually, I was part of a huge layoff with 700 people. I worked for a company that was getting ready to go through an initial public offering to be publicly traded. And actually, they had just gone through it, I should say. But they were going through a massive round of layoffs when they were splitting into two separate public companies and going through. I kind of saw it coming, so that really made me look at everything. I built a budget and a balance sheet personally, so I'm going through all of this stuff, just trying to put everything together. And seeing it coming, I had already started to look around. But as soon as it actually happened, they laid off so many people that certain federal regulations apply. They have to give you X weeks of notice, and they wound up giving X weeks of severance based on how long you had been there and all those types of things. So I actually wound up walking with like maybe $35,000 after taxes. And when that happened, I told myself, number one, okay, if this ever happens again, I want to be in a position that I can just walk away from corporate America. And number two, what do I do to be able to take this money but never spend it? Now that kind of becomes like the cash nest egg for doing the next thing. And so I found a job really quickly. In fact, the exact time that I was supposed to be laid off, I had my first interview, just thinking that it was probably coming. And my boss texted me that morning and said, "Hey, can you meet at 11?" I said, "Actually, I have another meeting if that's okay." He goes, "No, can you move it?" And so that was when I knew. But so I literally was supposed to have an interview the exact same time that I wound up getting laid off back then. So I followed up and I wound up taking that job. I effectively got a job making more money with less responsibility, which is a pretty good position to be in. I wound up staying with that company for 5.5 years. I had five different bosses in 5.5 years. So that was exhausting. I went from a company with, I think they had like 20,000 employees. And the one that I got laid off from and the one I went to had like 200,000. If I thought I was just a number before, that only got worse. But it gave me the flexibility to be able to start looking at what is it that I really want to do. And I started putting a lot more time, a lot more of my free time in that. And so I actually tried a bunch of different things. I started out listing a condo I was living in, just crashing with friends back in 2012. I only did that for about 3 months, but that was long before Airbnb was as well known as it is. I tried a t-shirt company. I bought a small vending machine route with a friend. We literally are going and filling sodas and candy bars. It took me about 2 or 3 months of that before I said, hey, this is awful. I don't want to do this. This is like death by a thousand cuts. So you run around all day and then you wind up making, you net $100. So it just wasn't worth it as far as my time. So I wound up selling out of that, just selling it back to the partner that I bought it with. I actually tried a mobile app. So I invested $80,000 of my own money. That's probably the biggest failure that I've had in my entrepreneur career. I have learned to fail a lot faster and a lot more cheaply at this phase. And also, I think once you get to a stable point in growing businesses, you learn to be able to put a solution out there that you think is a 70 or 80% solution and then listening to the market and adjusting. And I definitely didn't know how to do that back then. That consumed another probably 2.5 years. And then I listed a house or a room in a house, I should say, that I was living in 2016, February of 2016 for the first time on Airbnb. And I originally did that because I was working on the mobile app. And so mentally, I'm like, let me see how much I can make from this. Maybe I can quit my job. And then rather than take a salary at this other thing, I can make enough to pay my bills doing this. And ironically, that's what wound up lasting. So I took lemons and made lemonade out of it. I did that through the end of that year from February through December. And at the end of the year, I started to formalize it and set up an LLC and all that fun stuff and set up a business bank account, trying to start running things formally. And at the end of the year, I think I made like 30 grand or something net. And so now I have $30,000 sitting here too. So it was one of those things that's like, okay, this seems like it's working. How do I grow this? I was always super conservative. I didn't spend a dollar of that money until many years later. So just any extra money that I made from doing it, I just put it into this bank account. And so I didn't spend any of it until late 2019. I bought a duplex. I sold that house and bought a duplex. So I traded up and I invested a couple $100,000 in just repairs, a new roof, things like that into that property. And that was the first time that I spent any of the money I had made doing short-term rentals. So 3 or 4 years, I just let the money build. And so when COVID happened, it decimated my management business overnight. And it really forced us to pivot and start renting properties out for longer. But in terms of like my own property, I wasn't worried financially because I just hadn't spent very much money. So I was still sitting on a good amount of cash. So I was very slow and deliberate with it initially. And then the further along I got, the more risk I was willing to take, calculated risk. I let things grow to a point that now I feel like I can evaluate opportunities a lot faster with a lot more accuracy and also learn to fail instead of just making it to a point and then you fail big and it hurts your ego and it's like your dog dying. You feel sad about it. Instead of letting it get to that point, to fail much faster, much more incrementally at early steps and incorporate the lessons learned from those failures into the next thing and making things better, making systems, processes, all that stuff better along the way. And that just helped things build to where they are now, really.
So tell me, when you started, if let's say you started a business and it failed, in the beginning you mentioned you tried a couple of things till you got to renting a property, but it failed. And even with this, there were risks involved. So what do you tell yourself when you are taking those risks? What is your mindset at that time?
I think so. The upside of trauma and having gone through all of that is the ability to keep calm and think through your situation in chaos. And so that definitely helps as an entrepreneur because it's really just chaos every day. Just to be able to think logically and approach problems with a problem solution mentality instead of, oh no, what are we going to do now? But yeah, it's still a process to go through mentally to make sure that you're making the right decisions, reaching out to people that you trust that have been through similar situations. That's an easy way to mitigate your risk, is to learn from other people's failure instead of doing it yourself, which a lot of people don't take advantage of that for whatever reason. I think there's a lot of things that you could do along the way just to not necessarily mitigate failure, but mitigate devastating impacts that can come with failure if you do it wrong or fail too big. Now I have 12 employees. I don't ever want to jeopardize people's jobs. There's a lot of people that rely on me now at this point, and that's only going to be a bigger number over the coming years. That also makes you think a little bit differently and how you calculate risk, right? Because I'm never going to make a decision that's going to jeopardize somebody's family that works for me.
That's very thoughtful and responsible to think through in that perspective, because then you know to what degree you can take that risk, what is at stake. So, how did you turn it into this $10 million business? Is it more?
I have about $11 million of assets. My net worth is a little over seven. Just my property management company will do probably $5.25 million in bookings this year. We actually should do around 10 next year. So yeah, that's just the property management company. And then I'm building a boutique hotel brand now as well that has 2 properties under it. And we're looking to buy more there. I'm actually getting ready to launch my own mastermind. We've been formalizing the framework for that, and we're applying for trademarks now and all that fun stuff. So the goal is to launch that by January. And that actually will be like the nonprofit arm of my little empire, if you will. And so that's something that's very different from a lot of masterminds you see. It's really a money grab instead of what value can I provide to people. It's how much cash can I make from the things that I've learned. And so we're really trying to evaluate some of the other masterminds that are out there now and lay out a framework that makes sense. Obviously, I don't want to lose money. I want to be able to at least break even, but I really want that to be a piece of my legacy and be the nonprofit arm of what I'm building out for everything else. So at this point, the big, I guess, money driver for me is the management company. And we've grown that 100% year over year, every year for the last 4 years, and should do the same thing next year. We were honored with Inc. 5000 puts out their list of the fastest growing private companies in America. And we made the list. Since the top 5,000, when we came in at number 741. They actually make you submit tax returns to be able to rank you against everybody else. So I'm proud of that, but I think it's having the right team in place. We definitely have some really great teammates in place now. We formalized our sales process. That was one of the things I had done myself from the very beginning of the company, was all of the sales and the revenue management. And now I have 2 guys in the company that do a much better job at each of those things respectively than I ever did. So being able to know your strengths and weaknesses, but also be able to identify when somebody is potentially better than you at something. I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. That has really helped accelerate the growth as well too. Installing 2 people that took over the 2 things that I'd been doing from the beginning. And I'd done them reasonably well, but when you really want to get going and really scale and experience that hockey stick growth that everybody talks about in entrepreneurship, you really need to be able to back out of those roles and work on the business instead of in the business. And that was the most difficult part, I think, for the first several years, because I was always doing the revenue management. So I was always the person looking at cash flow. I'm the one that's adjusting rates for how much does a specific property rent during a specific season, and then doing all of the sales from beginning to end. I literally would get to a signed management agreement and then turn it over to the team to onboard that property. And it's just a much different process now. You can look at what's working and what's not and make adjustments. And again, there's people doing each of their respective jobs much better than I ever could have done them myself. The team building piece, I think, is the hardest piece of entrepreneurship, just because human beings are inherently unpredictable. And so finding the right team members and then nurturing that. And also, I think a lot of people have a hard time giving up control as they're growing their business. They're used to being the person that's doing everything. And so even if they hire somebody, they're still like triple checking their work or they're micromanaging. That's just not my style. That's not the point of building a team. And you're never going to scale doing that either if that's the way you operate. So, it was difficult to get to the team that we have now. I definitely made some wrong hires over the years, but I'm really proud of what we built now, and I'm super excited about the future going forward. So we just closed our first acquisition. We bought a small company up in North Carolina, October 1st, and we've integrated them into the existing business. And I would love to buy another company or 2 between now and the end of next year.
Wow, congratulations. And
Thanks.
there's so much learning here, how delegation is important, getting the load off you and utilizing that time to do something that you're really gifted at, identifying those strengths in you and really focusing on that area of your professional life. And I think the biggest role in anybody's success is the people that are behind them. It's having those complementary skills, bringing that kind of balance within your team who have different strengths and who can play out those different roles. That's the game changer, I think, to
Right.
have those really high performing teams in place who complement each other in their skills and
Totally.
potential. And so I think to have those right people around you and not to be that control freak that need to be micromanaging everything to get it done. And as
Right.
you said, to work on the business rather than in the business, because now
Right.
you've freed your time to do that. Not everybody has that skill. Like we all have a strength. Some are visionaries, some are good at operations. And so let's have those people within our team and do it exceptionally well. So we can do so much more than what we think, because that's when we can expand our growth. I heard somewhere that if you can find somebody who can do a job probably as 80% to what you do, it's time to let go and let them do and not
Right.
fixate over it to get it 100% how you would do.
Yeah, there's two books that have been probably the best books I've read in the last 5 years, and I keep a huge list of all of these on my website. So I've read probably 140 books in the last 5 years. But Buy Back Your Time and 10x is easier than 2x. And Buy Back Your Time talks about that specifically. And so the whole concept is if you can have somebody do an 80% job on a task, that's infinitely better than you doing the 100% job and doing it on a Sunday. So it's just a matter of being able to still have a life and try to maintain some semblance of balance. I think balance is mostly a myth as an entrepreneur. I think you can get there when you have a huge business, but even then, I think it still occupies your brain, even if you're doing other things. The point is to be able to do those other things so that it can occupy your brain and you can think through problems to come up with the vision and strategy, the overall approach, as opposed to being the person dealing down with the noise that doesn't necessarily help you drive the business, but are things that have to be done regardless.
Another great book that I learned a lot about teams was The Wisdom of Teams. I don't know if it's a great book on how you can create high performing teams within your business. I really enjoyed reading that. I forgot to ask you at that time, when you started your career, you mentioned that there was a case involved after your arrest. So, did that hinder in any way in you getting a job?
Oh, totally. Yeah. I was working in a bookstore and trying to get a job. And even to go into the bookstore, I had to look at the application and I had to read the question to see if it said I'd ever been charged or convicted because I hadn't been convicted at the time, but I had been charged. So yeah, that was a nightmare of an experience. It's interesting the way that the justice system is set up is if you have money, then you're probably going to get a better outcome. I was definitely broke at the time, and I certainly didn't have the worst possible outcome, but I also didn't have the best either. So I think the reality is I probably could have come away with that with pretrial intervention and had the ability to get those things expunged from my record shortly thereafter. I actually was able to get them expunged 10 years later because I randomly found a line in the legal code that said that if it was a nonviolent crime, you could get them expunged if you had no other charges for 10 years. So I contacted an attorney and he walked me through that process. But yeah, that was a complete nightmare. And it took me 10 years before I could actually get them expunged from my record. It's sad because when you look at the people that are in the justice system, the criminal justice system, there's usually a lot of poverty. There's a higher instance of mental health issues than there are in the general population. And if you are poor and you're going through that and you maybe don't have all your wits about you anyway, the system is set up to keep you there. It certainly is not set up to rehabilitate you so that you can go into society and have this successful life. When you have this black mark that's just hanging up on your record and something that you have to put on every single job application. You might be the smartest guy in the world and not be able to get hired at Wendy's or McDonald's. Not that there aren't great people working there, but you might not even be able to get one of those jobs. So it
So how,
really is designed to keep you where you are.
so how did you get that? Was it just fluke or?
It was definitely, I had some good timing luck for sure. It took probably, I would say, like 18 to 24 months for the case to work its way through the criminal justice system. And then ultimately, we agreed to a plea deal that was much better than the original charges, which is normal. The whole thing is that they charge you with a bunch of different things and hope something sticks. And so it took a couple years to get a better deal than what I was charged with, but it wound up, at least it wasn't felonies. I pled guilty to a couple of misdemeanors, but even that stayed on my record for 10 years. It took me another 10 years before I was able to get it expunged. So I have a kind of a soft spot for people that have to go through that, especially if they come from a place of poverty, just because it's a very difficult thing to work your way out of. I don't want to sound, arrogant or anything like that. I think one of the things that I realized going through some of that stuff is that I was blessed to have some moderate level of intelligence. It's just the way that my brain works. I can work my way out of some situations. And I think some people, and people that have a similar traumatic background that are still trying to figure out how to deal with trauma, maybe they have a substance abuse issue and they come from poverty, it becomes an almost impossible task for them to get from that place of poverty and substance abuse and working their way through trauma to a place of success and stability, financial stability, mental stability. It's a very difficult bridge to build between those two phases of life. So it's definitely something that I have a soft spot for when I see that. I don't know the answer, but it's definitely something that I recognize as a huge issue in this country.
So when you got your first job, not at Barnes and Nobles, but with in corporate setup, was the case still going on?
Oh, yeah.
And
It
did
was
that?
still going on when I was working through the temp agency, and
Okay.
it was still going on when I moved from the temp agency to a full-time job. In fact, it was probably at least another 7 months from when I started like full-time W-2 employee in corporate America to when the case actually settled. So yeah, that's another thing too. When you have something like that hanging over your head, that's all you think about every day. And it just becomes this thing that it's just looming over you and you're hoping you can get it resolved at some point.
Did it hinder in the hiring process? Did it cause any?
No, so I was fortunate enough when I went through for my second and third job. It was after that that I was able to get it expunged. But going into those two jobs, I had people that were recruiting me, right? And so I specifically, and people that were recruiting me that I trusted, it was the two guys that I had worked on that proposal with. And so they knew about my story. It's when I went and got the job offer in 2005, I literally said, "Hey, do you run a background check? Because if you do, it's not going to work out. Here's what you're going to find, but I know there's going to be questions, et cetera." So I literally had to say that in the next two jobs that I took as well too. And then the same thing in May of 2006 when I went to go work for Mark, the guy that's my dad now, had to tell him the exact same thing. He was like, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." And I don't know if it was a normal part of the process or not with both of those companies. So the first one had less than 100 employees. They had 87 employees when I got hired. So they were on the smaller side in terms of defense contractors. So that may not have been a normal part of the process. The other one actually had several hundred. So I have no idea what conversations happened there. Knowing this guy as long as I have now, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he went to his boss was the chief operating officer, right? So he was the second in command. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if he went there and was like, "Hey, look, like I know this kid, this is in the past, but there's this thing here, right? You guys got to be okay with this to give him a shot." It wouldn't surprise me at all. I've never actually asked that question of either of those guys, but I can tell you that I went into those formal interviews at both of the next two jobs as well, basically having to have my hat in hand and say, "Hey, I know this is an issue and I need to bring it to your attention." Otherwise, I certainly wasn't going to get a job somewhere. Sometimes they don't run background checks until afterwards too. And sometimes that's when they'll see, oh, someone's lied about a degree that they say they have. And so I wasn't going to put myself in a situation where I took a job and then they ran the background check and then I lose
Yeah.
my job over it. I really tried to own it and get ahead of it and be honest about the situation. And had either of them said it was an issue, then I probably would have just stayed where I was. And who knows, maybe it could have been an issue at that company at some point too. In hindsight, you ask like if it was just like a little bit of timing and luck. And I think absolutely, because if I didn't have those two guys advocating on my behalf, who knows if I would have even gotten those next two jobs to make it to the point where I could get those things expunged. So
Yeah, no,
pretty
two
lucky.
things stand out to me. One is, of course, being honest about it and being upfront about it and letting them know because that shows your integrity. And second is, I think, building those relationships. And the third aspect is showing up in character, like making sure that you represent that's really in the past and it's no longer how you function. And
Right.
so they must have seen that in you to have trusted that side of you, that this kid is really putting an effort to be something, get out of that and not let this hamper his future. You must have given them something to have that faith in you.
Yeah, I had spent a lot of hundreds of hours with both of them at
Yeah.
that point. And it came up during that. I viewed that as an opportunity to just be like, hey, here's where I am. I wasn't working directly for them, so it's not like I was going to get fired. Both of them did make me feel comfortable as we were working on this huge project together. When you spend Saturdays and Sundays in an office for a year and a half with two other people in an office that fits 100, you tend to get to know each other pretty well. So in hindsight, you're right. In hindsight, I probably got those two jobs just because I volunteered, because otherwise they wouldn't have known me. So why would they have hired me in that situation?
So now that you yourself are a business owner, you have a team around you, what kind of a culture do you promote in your own organization?
Well, I didn't work in corporate America for almost 20 years to create a job that people hate, much less that I hate. I want people to be proud of what we're building. If anything, I would say that I'm overly transparent in terms of where we are and where we're going. There's another book called Vivid Vision. I read a lot, as you can tell, I'm sure at this point. And so I actually built out a formal document of, hey, this is where we are today and this is where we want to be in 3 years. And then the plan of what that looks like. It's interesting now being 1 year into that and seeing how far along we've come since that was originally constructed, but encouraging people to be themselves and just the freedom of thought. I don't think that I can do everything the best in this company, right? I think it's a matter of if you have a better idea or you see something is broken, speak up, because I might not be doing the same thing that you're doing every day. And also something that I created when we had 20 listings under management instead of 100, and maybe it doesn't work anymore. I like to say nothing good lasts forever and nothing bad lasts forever. So if we have grown to the point that what we used to be doing doesn't work anymore, I need people to speak up and say that so we can find a better solution to that problem, right? So I think just creating a culture of building something that people can be proud of saying, I work for this company, and be proud to say that and feel like they are heard, I think is really important. I've got a few people that came from much larger luxury properties where, again, the processes and procedures are already in place. All you're doing is following them. So you're just a tiny piece of the process. And if you leave, nothing's going to change because they've already defined everything and they're just going to promote somebody else into that job. And I want people to really take ownership and step up and help grow the company. I always say too that opportunity creates or growth creates opportunity. As the company doubles year over year for the foreseeable future, that really creates opportunity for people that are willing to step up. I think everybody has their comfort zone of exactly what makes them happy, right? So I don't necessarily think that somebody's going to come in at a certain level and then grow to where we manage 1,000 listings. But I want to give them that opportunity to prove themselves if it is something that they want. So I think that's probably the funnest part when you are making hiring decisions and you can see people leaning into that and really stepping up and taking more responsibility as we get bigger and bigger, and then they have more employees working for them. It's a pretty cool thing to watch to see somebody grow into being their own leader. So
Wow.
that's the kind of culture I want people to feel valued and heard, and that they're a part of something that can be really great and that is going to keep growing and create opportunity for them to support their families.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's so nice to hear. To have that culture, I think anybody who's employed anywhere, you should be happy to go to work every morning. Look forward
Yes,
to it. Be invested in it. And when people are heard, when they feel valued, when they feel that they have a safe place to just be themselves, they invest themselves in it. They
totally.
give their best. It's good to hear that side of you. What's next for your company, for you?
The next thing really is launching this mastermind in January formally. I think selfishly that probably will create more opportunity for either the boutique hotel brand or the management company. I would love to help as many people get to financial independence as possible. I think if they wind up managing their own property and they grow that to 5 or 10 properties, that they'll hit a point where it's like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And maybe that creates some potential deal flow for my management company, or maybe buying a boutique hotel and then they realize like, oh, I don't want to do pieces of this, and my management company can help out with that. In terms of like near term, so yeah, I would love to buy another property management company in Asheville really anytime in the next 13, 14 months before the end of next year. And we only manage one property in Charlotte now. I would love to buy a company there that manages like 20 properties. I'm starting to look in Savannah. Let's say we finish this year around 100 listings under management. I would love to be somewhere between 200 and 250 at the end of next year. And that has to come from a combination of both growth with my boutique hotel brand, buying another property that my management company manages, but then also buying another company or two in the markets we want to be in next. And then obviously organic growth as well too. So that's really top of mind for me. The hard thing about the boutique hotel stuff is you have to find that exact right realtor in each market that really knows your asset class and is able to add value because they understand what it is you're trying to buy and how to value it and things like that. So I think we're getting there in a couple of markets, but I'll be excited. We actually opened the second B&B in 6 weeks from today. So we'll have two that have been through massive renovations. We put $800,000 into the first one and $1.1 million into the second one. So those were massive renovations. We'll have our first two properties open and running. From there is just tweaks to make them as profitable as possible. And then personally, I would love to do a capital raise in 2024. I think there are a lot of people out there that don't want to self manage. They don't want to manage these assets by themselves and consume their own time, but they do want to participate in the upside and invest. And so I think that'll be another vehicle to help provide a different path to financial independence for people. So it's a bunch of things is the short answer, but I'm really trying to lean into everything. I feel like I have really great people around me for all of these different projects and different facets of these projects. And I think it's just a matter of making sure that we have the right strategic vision laid out and giving people an opportunity to be successful.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds exciting. So tell me, with the current economic scenario right now, what are the current sentiments around real estate with inflation and political instability and in that?
Yep. Yeah, it's fun. Office space obviously has gotten crushed, right? Because so many companies are not sending their workers back to the office after COVID. So that's down significantly in some markets, even like 30 to 50%, depending on the market. And what we're doing, it's interesting. I think people will always want to take vacations, even if their budget is a little bit lower than what they normally would want to spend, or even if they're more selective with the location that they travel to. But I think that we could have a rate reduction across the portfolio. So our near term thesis is anywhere from a 5 to 10% reduction in rate. However, we've kind of moved our rate management strategies to capture more occupancy. And so the thought is if we can have higher occupancy at a slightly lower rate, then you can still make the same money. I think in terms of valuations, those have been crushed. Real estate, the rates right now are just crazy compared to where they were 18 months ago. You're talking about the difference between buying something at 3.5, 4.5% versus 8.5. A lot of deals that work at 4% don't work at 8. So you have to be more selective. But I also think in terms of buying both B&Bs and property management companies, If it creates distress, that could also create opportunity for us because we're on good financial footing. I think we're in a great position in both of those brands that we're building. And so I think if there is distress, then maybe that actually creates opportunity for us to go in and buy either a company or another B&B. It just remains to be seen how much distress there is.
This gives an understanding to your thinking from the complete perspective. So, if it's an investor who is looking to have a side business or is wanting to invest in real estate, given the high rate, do people come to you who pay upfront or do they take a mortgage to buy a property? How does that work for
Yeah,
investors?
I'm happy to like share my experience, and there's a lot of different pieces to it in
Yeah.
terms of banking relationships, insurance relationships, realtor relationships, like all of those types of things. I'm always happy to share that kind of stuff with somebody, or even just how you approach and value something. I think realistically, it depends on what somebody's goals are. I'm a big clarity person. That's the first of my core values. If you don't have that clarity, and you don't know what your vision of happiness looks like, then it makes it very difficult to reverse engineer the path to get there. I think there's a lot of questions that I would ask somebody, but if they want to manage everything themselves, then they really need to make sure that their project that they're looking at works at a high interest rate. Fortunately, I don't think they'll get too much higher, but if your rate works at 8.5, then it looks really good if rates come down to 5.5. It's just a matter of making sure that you're properly valuing the asset based on the potential revenue. And somebody that hasn't done that before and they don't have any data to look at themselves, they have no idea how to do that. That's the piece where it is helpful to reach out to somebody like me. I can at least point people to different tools that they can use to be able to have access to some of that data at a relatively cheap price. And that way they're not just making it up. The banks don't go for that when you just make up numbers because they're running their own numbers based on their own algorithms. So yeah, it's definitely makes it more difficult. I think there was a lot more room for error when you could go buy a vacation rental at 3.5% or 4% than there is now, for sure.
Where can they find this information if somebody wants to reach out to you to explore investing in real estate in a vacation rental? So, who can they reach out and talk to?
So my website is just my name, joshhatter.com. People actually can book a Calendly link with me. I say this when I speak on podcasts. I have had more people do it in the last couple months. I'm happy to have a conversation with people. We usually schedule 30 minutes, and the last one I had was somebody that works for a management consulting company in Denver last Wednesday. We wound up talking for an hour and a half. Some people come armed with lots of questions, and I love that because you're making a good use of both of our time. And some people just don't have that clarity. So you want to talk to somebody to figure out what it is that looks like success for you. If somebody wants to reach out, they're always able to book through my website. And we're getting ready to launch this mastermind. So if they want to be involved in hospitality, real estate specifically, that's really what this is geared toward. We're calling it Keys Collective. And so anything from buying one short-term rental to I want to manage 1,000 listings in 3 years. And we're starting to set up mentors in every different aspect that somebody may come across in hospitality real estate. So I have a guy that is doing rental arbitrage. I have a guy that raised 5.3 million for a seed round for venture capital to go buy property management companies. He's getting ready to raise a $10 million round now. Syndicators. I have a fractional CFO that's willing to help people out and do classes based on the types of things you should track financially. And then when you get to this point, this is when you should convert to QuickBooks Online. So those types of things. So anything that has to do with hospitality real estate, we're trying to set up this value add opportunity where regardless of what the question is, we have somebody that they have access to that can mentor them and help them get to where they want to be.
It's good to know people can reach out to you. We had a great conversation and a lot of learning. And today, where you have reached your vision as you'll grow, what would you say that your purpose in life is?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think at this point, for me, I think that I have some really great knowledge to help people reach financial independence. And I really hope that my legacy is that I gave freely of that information to people and that I was highly transparent while also helping people be held accountable for what they say they want to do and the goals they want to reach. But I hope in 10 years I look back and there are dozens, if not hundreds of people that can point to me and say, I'm in this position in life largely because this guy gave me an opportunity or he introduced me to this person or that person and helped me set up what my vision of happiness is. So that's really my big goal for the mastermind, is to be able to give back and create some sort of tangible legacy of helping people get in control of their lives and reach financial independence.
Nice. I love that. I really love that. So, how do you look back at your career today?
Wow, I definitely see the value in corporate America. I wish I hadn't stayed so long, but I think everything happens for a reason too. When I look at the different phases and what I learned at the different phases, there were things along the way that I think make me a better entrepreneur and make me better at managing cash flow, things like that, and even team building, all of those types of things. So it's been really interesting, but I don't know, maybe I'm a cheesy optimist, but I think the best is yet to come. I like to tell people, when you're in corporate America, you have things that you have to do, right? You may have 10 hours a week of meetings or 20 hours or whatever. And you have to prepare for those generally. Maybe you have to present something. I could do 3 things or 5 things in a day. All of those things are toward building this empire, right? And so when you go from maybe 10% to 30% of your job is working on these things to 100% of my time is spent doing these things and trying to reach the goals that I have set for myself, it really makes things move much faster than you would ever possibly imagine. It's really fun to watch, and I'm very grateful for some of the positions that I've been in, but I think the next 10 years is going to be infinitely better than the last 20.
Yeah. Would you have done anything differently?
I definitely would have left corporate America sooner, but I'm not really a big regret guy.
Mm.
I think it's more so trying to learn from experiences instead of wishing things could be different, because the reality is you can't go back and change things. So for me, it's about trying to be better in the decision making process the next time around. And there's certainly things that I think I could have made easier on myself, being too stubborn or whatever, but I think I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I'm pretty grateful for where that is.
That's wisdom. That's so well said. And what would you say to somebody who's thinking of a transition, like a career transition, like yours, from corporate America to an entrepreneur, or somebody who's been really aspiring to be an entrepreneur and hasn't taken those baby steps yet? What would you say to somebody like that?
If somebody hasn't done anything, I think there's a lot that you can do before you quit your job. It's a lot easier if you have something to walk into as opposed to just saying, all right, I'm out and walking out the door and then starting from scratch. There's just so many steps involved. And just frankly, so many books you can read. You just have to be more efficient with your time that you have in your off hours. But I certainly wouldn't advise to anybody to just walk away and quit their job without having some type of plan in place. That's why clarity is so important to me, because I think people might know I don't want to do this, but they have no idea what they want to do. And so I literally just had a coffee meeting with somebody that reached out to me this morning. And I always kind of lead with, what I want you to do is be very specific. And when you close your eyes and you envision success, what exactly do you see? What does it look like? And be very specific with that. Because if you don't have that clarity of vision for what success and happiness are, and if you're married, talk about it with your spouse. You've got to spend some time on defining exactly what that success looks like, because only then can you reverse engineer the path to get there and ask people for help. People can't help you if they don't know where you're trying to go, right? It's the old saying of, if you don't know where you're going, any path will get you there. So the more specific somebody is when they come to me, the more likely I am going to be able to help them, even if it's not me, because their goals have nothing to do with things that I have experience with. I still probably can point them to somebody that has experience doing the things that they want to do. So having that level of specificity and knowing exactly what your vision of happiness looks like, I think is the very most important thing for anybody that's still in their job. And if you don't know what that is, there's a lot of great books out there to jog your thoughts, start journaling, write down exactly what you love about your job and what you hate. Like begin to build that bridge to transition into something that you love.
Again, wisdom. It's a very wise advice and it's come with experience. I think it says a lot about the journey that you've taken. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you for your time. You've always been so generous with it. And I am so grateful to have you on this podcast and to learn so much through this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
If you found the content valuable, please like, share, and subscribe and spread the word. I feel the best compliment is being referred. That one action of yours can help us reach more people and fulfill the mission of thriving changes. Thank you for considering.